Ya empezó.
Hi, everyone. Hi, everyone. Horacio is looking for a better connection. Then we will start now. I will present the session. Thank you very much to all of you to be part of this pre-event of the 18th International Docomomo Conference that will take part in took place in Chile in December 2024. Today we will have two presentations related with modern heritage, Chilean modern heritage masterpiece, Montemar Marine Biology, that will be presented by Maximiano Atria from France and Chile, and the second presentation, Institute and United Nations building, that will be presented by Horacio after the Maximiano presentation. Max, let's go, please. You start, and if it's possible, if you need it, you can add your presentation also.
Well, hello, everyone. Thank you, Humberto, for this introduction. I will share my, wait, where is it? Wait, I don't find the share windows. Okay, I have it here. Everything is okay. You see it?
Yeah, perfectly.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you. Well, I'd like to thank Horacio for inviting me to this session of this today's pre-event. I'm very happy, well, Horacio, and to all the organizing committee of the 18th International Conference of Docomomo. I'm very happy of the fact that the conference will be held in Chile. I think it was sort of impossible dream that we had with Horacio when we started this in 2003. So I think it's a very good. It's very good that finally we can do it as the Chilean chapter of Docomomo International. I would also like to welcome also the idea of the pre-events, which is a novelty in the organization of international conferences in Docomomo, which is very useful way in which to promote the contents of the conference. I think it's a very good thing that that it's happening, and I hope that it will be part of the ethos of our organization. I just would like, before my presentation, give some thoughts to Maristela Casciato, the former chair of Docomomo International, who suffered a heart attack last week. I hear that she's in a rather good shape, but very weak. So I hope that everything turns okay with her. This session is about two magnificent buildings. I would say two, as Humberto said, two of the greatest masterpieces of modern architecture in Chile, the 20th century. And my presentation, I will do it starting from the content that I did for my master's degree presented in 2008, which was guided by Horacio. And so there are a lot of thoughts and reflections and analysis that I will do here that are from that thesis, but also from some afterthoughts and after analysis that I've done in the years that have passed since my thesis presentation. And I will structure this presentation in three parts. First, a rather factual part where I will talk about the work and its circumstances, its architect, its context, its historical context, and all that. A second part, which will be more analytical, regarding to the relationship between landscape and architecture, which was one of the main parts of my analysis in my thesis. And a third and final part, in which I will address the idea of the Montemar station as a case study, which will help to enlighten also the methodologies and the ways in which from Docomomo, Chile, we have dealt with this building or with other buildings in our short but intense history. So first, I will talk about the facts of the Montemar Marine Biology Station, which is, in my opinion, one of the most remarkable buildings of the 20th century in Chile. Not only because of its form and its architectural characteristics, but also because this special symbiosis that it establishes between the architecture of the building and the landscape in which it was built. This is a picture of the station recently inaugurated in 1959. We see almost all the elements of its architecture. Many of them have disappeared today, and we will see in this along this presentation how it has changed, and the current state will give some moment to the present state. When I studied this building as part of my thesis, it was a building that had been almost never studied in depth. It was a very known building. It was very famous, but the building and its architect were in most. I mean, we could say they were very, very unstudied in a very dark state in regarding the studies of heritage. Gebhardt himself was a very obscure figure in the history of modern architecture and of the history of his generation. He didn't build much. He had a very complex personality. He didn't set up an office building himself. He worked all the time secluded with a very small amount of collaborators. He never kept an archive of his work. So there are no plans, there are no statements, no drawings, nothing. He had a very complex personal life, so he didn't stay very long in the same place. He lived in Chile, in Argentina, in Temuco, in Santiago. So it was very difficult in general to gather some information about himself and about his work. So that was a big part of my thesis. In any way, nor the building nor Gebhard were unknown elements in the modern architecture in Chile. Every review of modern architecture showed this building and other buildings by Gebhard. I mean, his work was very small, but as he said in a quotation that Osvaldo Cáceres gave of him, Gebhard was usually said that his work was very small but very good. So he was not very modest. But in any way, I think personally that he was right. There are, I would say, we could count with the fingers of two hands the built works by Gebhard. But in any way, he was just, we could say he was just another architect in his generation, because he was not one of the most famous architects of the 20th century, figures such as Duarte, Dávila, or the office of Bresciani Valdés Castillo Huidobro, which were, we all know, were the main figures of Chilean modern architecture. The beginnings of Gebhard as an architect were not easy. He was part of the group of students in the University of Chile that promoted a reform movement in 1933, demanding the modification of study plans, the incorporation of modern-oriented professors, and the abandonment of the classical patterns of study. They asked also for the execution of parallel workshops, of competitions, the incorporation of professors with a modern view, and the radical change of the structure of the courses in the university. And as we know, this movement ended badly for the students, although they achieved some progress, mainly the replacement of the director of the school, taking over Juan Martinez as a consensus figure. He was not a very modern architect, but he was open to notions of rationalism and localism, which are evident, for instance, in his building of the 1929 exhibition in Seville, which is it's not a classical building, it's not either a modern one. Gebhard was suspended from his studies, so he was he couldn't continue studying, differently from some of his colleagues in the movement, which made some compromises and were allowed to go back to school. So he was outside the university and had to find ways of occupying his time. And he found that one of the main things that he did was the founding of the Arquitectura magazine with Waldo Parragués, which was done in 1935. And only 6 issues would be published of this magazine, but it was the first dedicated magazine to architecture, and they were very, very strong in the way in which they promoted modern architecture. He also worked he had to find work, so he employed himself in the statistics office of the municipality of Santiago, where he elaborated a study of the habitability conditions of the tenement houses, the conventillos, which were we would say which were very, very extended in the territory of the municipality of Santiago. This study was an invaluable input for the actions that would later be taken by the future Ministry of Housing, and it gave way in 1940 to the first housing exhibition that was mounted in the central part of the Alameda Avenue, in front of what is now the main building of the Banco del Estado, like 100 meters from the La Moneda Palace. An exhibition that was commissioned by the Minister of Health, Salvador Allende, and carried out by a team composed of doctors, medicine doctors, Roberto Alvarado and Jorge Manguinti, engineers like Bernardo Vila y Mario Antonio Leti, architects like Enrique Gebhard, Waldo Parragués, Orlando Rojas, Euclidio Guzmán, Jorge Aguirre y Jorge Bruno González, photographer Antonio Quintana, and painter Hernán Gasmuri. In these activities, Gebhardt was not the main figure, was not the main organizer. He participated also in the group that founded, we could say, the Chilean CM group that signed a declaration, but disbanded just after that. So there were no actions, practical actions of this CM group. But it demonstrates a commitment to the modern ideas that would feed his work and his positions during his lifetime. The suspension of his studies he had a fixed length, and ended in 1937, where he could go back to school and managed to obtain his degree with a project guided by Roberto Dávila Carson. His initial work as a professional architect are very scarce but powerful. At least 3 houses in Ñuñoa, one on Sucre Street, another on Miguel Claro Street, and another on Eduardo Donoso Street, all in a very, very close perimeter. In all of them, he demonstrated a very elaborate mastery of the modern language, more the classical language of modern architecture based on pure volumes, pure white volumes, cylindrical columns, large glazed panels, and the use of pilotis as part of the traditional aesthetic. My research regarding Montemar was able to establish in the history of Gebhardt's biography a chronology of the circumstances that led to the existence of the biology station. Starting with the commission received by the architect to participate in a reconnaissance mission on the central coast of Chile. A group of people was boarded in a boat, and they went. They visited some groves in the coast to find a suitable place to build the marine station. Because the idea of the promoter, which was Dr. Parmenio Yáñez, was that the station should be built on top of the coast, which was very obvious regarding the function of the biology station. In my opinion, the most interesting aspect of this chronology is that the project was developed in several stages. It was not built in one moment, and it was probably due to the financial difficulties of the university during the Second World War to undertake the construction of the entire complex as originally was planned by Gebhardt in 1941. The project was commissioned at the beginning of 1941, and this is the full project that Gebhardt presented to the university. In any way, the circumstance of being built in parts allowed the building, as we know it today, to be a sort of showcase of a development, and I expressly avoid the use of the word evolution in Gebhardt's architecture. Nourished by his own biography, the complexity of his biography, and by a progressive way of understanding the adaptation that architecture should have with respect to landscape. The commission was probably one of the most important of Gebhardt, and he developed what we could call a classically modern project with independent parallelepiped volumes supported by cylindrical pilotis, very in typical way of modern architecture of the 20s and 30s, arranged at right angles. We can see here, this is the Montemar rocks, and this is the station in the center. And here at the left, there's a botanical garden that was supposed to be built in this part of the terrain, and in the other side there was this industrial section which was supposed to workshops to work all the tools and the elements that the biology station would use. And in the center, besides the station, is a proposed aquarium that was part of this idea that the station should not be only reserved for scientific studies, but also to the public and the divulgation of the knowledge to the general public. And there was a residential building here, sort of a small unité d'habitation to receive the international scholars that would come here to study. In any way, none of these public projects, programs would be built, nor the botanical garden, nor the residential building, nor the aquarium, nor the industrial, only the station was built. As it would happen, this is the first project, 1941. The disintegration of the program into independent volumes, and we can see here 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 volumes. The differentiation of volumes for uses could be justified by the foresight that the project would be built in parts, so that each partial construction will not leave the complex as an unfinished item. Another consequence of this was the projection of the station was each time the project was taken up by Guevara in the future would give him the possibility of updating the design of the various parts that were not built before. We will see how this was done in 3 times. This one, then the second project of 1955, and then the final when he redesigned the aquarium, which was the part that was not built in 1959. The first part was only partially built. We can see here what was built in 1945, was the date of the inauguration of the station, which were the laboratories building of the one with the square windows, and with the basement. It's not really a basement, but it's here. It's a level of built in stone, and the volume of the vertical circulation, which is here, and which would give later the place for the connection with the library. It was probably the most urgent part of the station. I mean, the offices of the scientifics. And it was the part that the university was able to build in 1945. Later, in 1955, Gebhardt would take the project and will build the rest of the complex. But instead of building the volumes planned in 1941 and finishing the original project, Gebhardt redesigned the entire station, except for the 2 volumes that have been built originally, which are these ones, the scientific building here, laboratories, and the staircase volume, the vertical one here. The second project is radically different from the first and shows the changes that the 14 years of his career had imprinted on the understanding of architecture and aspects such as structural design, the expressiveness of materials, the integration of art and architecture, and the bidirectional relationship established between architecture and the landscape in which it was inserted. Between these 2 moments, we can cite 2 experiences that had a highly formative influence on Gebhardt and probably explain these differences between the first and the second project. The first experience was the participation of Gebhardt in the program of Defensa de la Raza y Aprovechamiento de las Horas Libres, a public program created by the Popular Front government, for which he designed and built the Hogaripódromo, which we can see here in plan and picture. Building that sadly was demolished a few years ago and was built inside the central part of the hippodrome. He had been invited to participate by his friend Jorge Aguirre, and in the building, Gebhardt experimented with various elements that would later appear in the second stage of the biology station. It was a building with a recreational program, with game rooms, a dairy bar, a cafeteria, a terrace, with large windows, taking advantage of the open space of the central terrain of the hippodrome, as a landscape that took into account the geographical conditions of the Santiago basin, with views of the Cordillera and on the grassy meadows of the hippodrome. On the second floor, the dining room was covered by a large vault that you can see in the picture, that was the support of an allegorical mural executed by the muralist Javier Guerrero. The second experience that I was talking about was his stay in Argentina between 1948 and at least 1955. The date of his return to Chile was not possible to fix in my thesis. First to participate in the team developing Le Corbusier's Buenos Aires Plan project led by Joan Kurchan and Jorge Ferrer-Ardoy, for which he stayed in 1948 and 1949 when it was cancelled. And then after that, in his collaboration with Miguel Conrado Roca, with whom he developed the urban plans for Bahía Blanca, which we can see here, a part of it at least, and Necochea, and designed the Roca Railway building in Buenos Aires, which was built and published in some architectural magazines. In the Bahía Blanca project, Gebhard played the role of architect for the architecture of the central sector of the city, which the plan we can see in the left is the central area of Bahía Blanca, with the railway station on the bottom here, and we can see the model of that part here. A new railway station was projected, as well as service and residential neighborhoods with several buildings to promote the densification of the center of Bahía Blanca. In these two intermediate experiences, Gebhard would experiment with new materials and with the relationship with art, as clearly appears in the Docomomo home, and with a structural expressiveness that gave a great turn to his architecture, especially after his work with Roca. Here we can see the central hall of this railway station as a large roof suspended from these arches. So it's a very we could say a very daring proposal of a structural system. The reformulation of Montemar in 1955 was clearly nourished by these new expressivities and experiences, especially in the incorporation of art, with participation of Maria Martner, Eugenio Brito, and Carlos González, and with a novel structural solution for the elevated administration and library buildings, which are this one, the administrative building, the auditorium, and the library. The solution took the basic element of modern architecture, the cylindrical column, and transformed it into a flattened, diagonally exposed column, we can see there in the picture, in order to absorb the dynamic stresses of an earthquake without structuring the building with walls, which would have reduced the transparency of these elements. The relevance of this solution, studied together with the engineer Raúl Campuzano, has been demonstrated by the resistance it has had over time, in addition to having been reinforced in 1977 with a thickening of the columns, a solution that was probably necessary, but which radically modified the slenderness of these elements. In this picture, the modification of the structure was already done. We can see here this double W of under the library. It's very thick columns that were slender in the original project. So this was, this was inaugurated in 1959, and in that moment, Gebhard proposed a third design, which was left only in paper, and for which there's only one drawing that I won't show here, because I just wanted to concentrate on the two moments of the construction of Montemar in 1945 and 1959. In my master's thesis, and this was expressed in the title of the thesis, the central theme of my approach to the study of this building was the permanence of landscape in architecture. Modern architecture, in its early years, what we could call the heroic years, had an ambiguous relationship with landscape, inspired perhaps by the classical solution that understood architecture as an eminently human and artificial action that should operate by contrast. This idea, expressed in the purist aesthetics of Le Corbusier's first stage, for example, and recorded in his third lecture in Buenos Aires in 1929, entitled Architecture in Everything, Urbanism in Everything, is related to somewhat abstract and purist aesthetics of the white volume and the differentiation between volume and context clear in these drawings, for instance, where he expressed this idea of this white box located in different contexts and keeping its pure form. At Montemar, in the project finally built, we could see here in the center right part of the picture, here, between the road and the rocks, Gebhard incorporated notions of landscape that were quite novel in the local context and that responded to the conditions of this geographical space in which a station was located. In a text he wrote when the building opened in 1959, in a publication of the project, he spoke of landscape as, and I open quotes, a cultural necessity, close quotations. The spectacular location of the biology station takes advantage of various landscape and geographical conditions to favor its functions. It has its own access to the sea, protected by the rocky ridge that faces the sea, this part here. This is the sort of channel that allows the access from the sea to the station, protected by the rocks, a small harbor, and coexists with a rich ecosystem of marine, terrestrial, and botanical species, a reason that have led Gebhard to propose the construction of the aquarium and the botanical garden as a way to bring the community closer to the action of the scientists. The architecture of the building responds to these conditions by acknowledging the existence of the rocks, the beach, and the power of the ocean. In the text accompanying the publication that I was mentioning before, Gebhard writes, I open quote, a building that deliberately frames its changing landscapes, that doesn't hide the rocks, the sand, and the waters of the sea, close quotes. There has been much discussion, and in my research, I address it as well, about the relationship with the pre-existing activities in the Montemar beach and cove before the construction of the station. There were two activities in Montemar before the construction, a recreational beach that you can see in the left, and a fisherman's cove that we can see sharing the space with the station in the right. The former, the recreational beach, did not survive the construction of the station, partly because it was a very small beach, and the presence of the station made it very unlikely that vacationers would want to bathe in a place so small between the buildings and the sea. Besides, there were several beaches nearby, so it was not a very noticeable loss for the tourism of the area. The one that did manage to survive to this day was the Fisherman's Cove. Dr. Yanez saw the presence of the fishermen as an advantage because of the collaboration that the station scientists could establish with them to capture specimens and to use their boats for exploratory trips, guided by those who knew these coastal rocks better than anyone else. I had the chance, for instance, when I was doing my research, to go out in a boat with the fishermen, and they were very, very, in a close relationship with the structure of the building. They use up to this day, they use these diagonal columns here to put the boats in upside down to dry. So it's a very, very interesting way in which the fishermen can work with the space under the station. Gebhard, in view of the presence of these pre-existing activities, considered the space under the building in contact with the ground as a noble space, while the buildings were raised off the ground to establish a distance and not to block the visual perception of the ocean from the coastal road. The transparency of the building was evident in this gesture of elevating the volumes in 1955, and by the use of entirely glazed facades in the administrative buildings. Here we can see the change of the window system. Originally, the glass was from the beam to the roof and was very transparent. So from the road, we could see the ocean across the building. And here we, in this picture from the inside of the auditorium, there was this window with a very interesting design that allowed the people inside the auditorium to see the rocks on the ocean. This is not possible today because the window was closed. Finally, in this third part, to conclude, I would like to make some reflections about what has concerned us about Montemar in Docomomo, Chile, and the state it is in today, in the light of possible actions of valuation and recovery. Montemar today is a sick building. It urgently needs actions to repair what has been destroying many of the architectural values that I have been mentioning in this presentation. I am not only talking about obvious deterioration, which becomes even more serious in a highly corrosive environment such as the first line in front of the sea, exposed to the direct blow of salty sea breezes and waves from there when there are tidal waves, which happen very often. This damage has been recorded and is clearly an urgent concern that needs to be addressed, but it's not the main one. Probably the toughest urgencies regarding the condition have to do with the conflict between the conception of an original use as a marine biology station for research and the requirements that its current function imposes on it. It is now the headquarters of the Faculty of Marine Sciences of the University of Valparaiso. And this means that teaching spaces are needed, which the building didn't have originally, because it was not supposed to be a teaching facility. We became aware of this when we organized the National Docomomo Chile seminar in 2005. One of the activities included in the seminar was a trip to Valparaiso and the surrounding areas. And then we visited, among other buildings, for instance, the Naval School in Valparaiso. We visited the biology station at Montemar. There we were confronted with the expansion that what began shortly before that, and that only thanks to this to the bankruptcy of the construction company was stopped and not going on. The expansion made evident the conflict between the preservation of the building and the new uses that were demanded from it. So the approach to the authorities in charge of the building was always from a position that complemented both interests. The idea that they needed extra space and that they needed to intervene the building in a way. We mounted a national and international campaign and successfully nominated Montemar for the 2008 World Monuments Watch. That was, it was successfully, but in a way, it was not very, we were not very happy that Montemar was in the state, but it helped the campaign. And with the support of the authorities of the Architecture School of the Universidad of Valparaiso, and with a flow of letters of support from the other Docomomo chapters, we had multiple meetings with the dean of the faculty, with the faculty council, with the professors, and with the rector of the university to present our point of view. And all this had the effect of convincing the university of the fact that the extension had to be demolished, which happened in 2008, happily. But the needs after the demolition of the extension remain, and the mismatch between the spatial conditions and the requirements of use have put the building permanently in question and in conflict. Following the campaign for the demolition of the extension, we had a series of meetings with the faculty authorities to see how to help launch actions to recover the building that would not jeopardize its integrity and would address the needs of the faculty to provide teaching space. There was a broad recognition that actions such as this extension were not should not be repeated. But there was also the awareness that it was unlikely that a scientific restoration of the building could be achieved. In the meantime, with Horacio, we unsuccessfully applied the Montemar for funds to finance a preliminary study of damages, and little by little, it was the faculty itself that took the initiative to evaluate its headquarters and take action. And I think, as a case study, that is one of the deepest successes that we had in this case, because finally it was the main authorities that had changed their view regarding the building, and that way they were now in charge of the actions to promote the conservation and reparation of the building. Today, a dossier is being prepared to declare the building a historical monument, which could be a first step to start designing a recovery plan for a remarkable but badly damaged building. All in all, the building continues to attract attention and remains an inescapable presence in the waterfront, in the road between Reñaca and Concon, precisely thanks to the elements that Gebhardt incorporated and that have made that relationship with the landscape, with the coast, with the ocean, as valid as on the day of its inauguration in 1959. In my research, I devoted an important part of my time to ask myself about the reasons for the form and to inquire about the design decisions that appear in singular elements, such as the system of routes of access, the different axes of the building, the multiplicity of entries, the variability of the design of the stairs. There are at least 4 different stairs in different parts of the building, connecting different elements of the volumes that are independent from each other, the arrangement of the windows, or, as I mentioned before, the transparency of the facades or its structural system. The question about the reasons for the building seems to me to be the key question that can lead us to understand where to put our efforts when trying to recover an heritage building. The impossibility of denying the passage of time and returning to the zero moment, the original moment of inauguration, imposes the need to use the building as a historical document to extract from it the signs of what is transcendent. My conclusion at the time was that what the building constructed were what the building did in this place were some unique spaces that it was desirable to recover, and that these elements were probably lost forever, and whose recovery would be, we have denoted more a nostalgia than an intelligent action towards the recovery of the building. That recovery, if that recovery ever became a reality. I'm talking about, for instance, the balcony of the library that was lost, that we saw in the first picture. 18 years after that visit in 2005, in the national seminar where we visited the coast, Montemar remains an excellent case study for reviewing Docomomo's practices and the possibilities of what can or cannot be done in cases like this. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Maximiano, for your presentation. I give the floor for if we have question or comments for Maximiano. We are waiting for Horacio connection. I don't know if we have any question on the presentation.
I have a brief question, if possible.
Go ahead.
First of all, do you hear me well? I'm in the library, so I can't speak any louder than this. Okay. Thank you, Maximiliano, for your presentation. I think that it was very clear and very organized, so thank you. My question is very simple. On the beginning, when you were exposing the architect's work and the case of Montemar, why do you avoid the word evolution in this architect's work? That's my question.
It's a very interesting question. That's something that we discussed sometimes with Horacio during the work on the thesis, but also when we were working together in a course in the master's program. I think it was the Modern Project course. It was related to the idea that in art and architecture, we hardly can talk about evolution. I mean, because I think it's difficult and even dangerous to talk about evolution in terms of what comes after. It's more evolved than what came before. So with Horacio, mainly Horacio, but then I assumed this position also. We were talking about, in Spanish is, el arte se desenvuelve, that art explores its ways, we could say, but not evolving. It's not there. We couldn't say that the first project of Guevara is less interesting or worse than the second one. There's no evolution in his work. There's just it's the pass of time from one position to another, from one conception of architecture to another. So this the classical way, the classical aesthetics of the white architecture of the 20s has not suffered an evolution towards the architecture of the 50s, of the 60s. That's why I avoid the idea of evolution, and I talk more of what's the word that I used? Development, which is not a very good word because the translation of desenvolvimiento is not very clear. But it's that idea. I mean, it's not a problem of evolution. It's not a problem from going to bad to better or from worse to good. It's a problem of different moments, and those moments have the same value. In historical terms, I mean.
Thank you. Horacio is here. I didn't see you because your name is Vicente Osorio, Horacio. You're muted. You're still muted.
I tried to get in again with my name, but it was impossible. So I did it with the link Vicente send. So my name is Vicente Osorio now. So I'm going to try to do it in a better way possible, because the connection is not really good, but I hope you can, Trilce can put the presentation on, and I have only without the camera and only my voice.
Yeah.
So when you can start, and I'm sorry, but it would be some what can I say? Probably some issues.
Horacio, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, I will present you.
Okay,
now,
thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Horacio. Horacio Torrent is professor at Católica University, School of Architecture, and he is the president of Docomomo, Chile, and the responsible of the organization here in Chile of this huge event in December 2024. Thank you, Horacio. You have the floor.
Thank you, Humberto. I tried to do the best. Okay, recent interventions on modern architecture of high cultural significance have set new challenges, opening discussion on the various positions associated with their preservation. That addresses the relationship between newly conceived architecture and modern heritage, for which the analysis of designs tool at stake in the original buildings, the ideas promoted in terms of its significance, and of course, the critical terms of its significance, and the results obtained in material terms become the key features to position thereon in each case. Next. The ability of modern architecture to represent a monumental condition was proposed as a critical concern in the post-war period, recognizing the need for an architecture that expressed social and community life, as was pointed out in the 9-point on monumentality by Gideon Sert and Leger. The inability of modern architecture to deal with the issue was recognized, proposing the necessity of overcoming functionalism through a new monumentality that would recover the lyrical values of architecture. Next. The criticism of the United Nations complex in New York in 1947 to 1952 are very well known. Next. Such as the memorable one made by Louis Mumford in the New Yorker about the importance of the representation of the bureaucratic structure over the presence of the assembly. Next. Next, as well as the ones in the interior of the assembly building, asking if that would be a turning point of modern architecture or the bankruptcy of international style. Next. The project for the UNESCO headquarters in Paris also next had a controversial trajectory with changing designers and projects and numerous criticisms on the final building. Next. Architectural critics assumed that the building for the United Nations could not represent the meanings that the spirits of the newly born international organization was proposing to the world. Next, the issues of a new monumentality reflecting political and cultural significance should have been reflected in them. At the end of 1957, Dag Hammarskjöld, the United Nations Secretary General, accepted Chile's offers to build a United Nations headquarters in Santiago. In 1960, a competition was held to which 14 proposals were submitted. The jury, composed among others by Enrique Mindling from Brazil and Sergio Larraín from Chile, distinguished 4 proposals sent to New York for the final selection that Hatma Horst made with the advice of Wallace Harrison and Philip Johnson. The award went to Emilio Duarte and his collaborators, Roberto Goicolea, Cristian de Grote, and Oscar Santelices. It was not until 1960 that one of the organization's peripheral headquarters would have a building worthy of its significance. Next. Inaugurated in August 29, 1966, the United Nations buildings in Santiago de Chile later houses the Economic Commission for Latin America and the Caribbean, ECLAC, an institution created in 1948 to promote the region's economic and social development. The complex is located on the banks of the Mapocho River, which ran through the valley of Santiago by the Andes. Next. Duarte had graduated as an architect from the Pontificia Universidad Católica de Chile in 1941 and obtained a master's degree in architecture at Harvard University in 1943, collaborating with Walter Gropius's office and later in 1952 in the Le Corbusier Atelier. Back in Chile, he assumed works of greater urban dimension, such as the University of Concepcion campus. Next. Next. The statement submitted to the competition was clear and straightforward. The United Nations building is conceived as a house and as a monument, the house for the nations in community, the monument visible expressions of their spiritual and social house and monument emerge as a plastic and functional unit, legible to all, monument for the nations, monument for its meeting point, Chile, in consonant with the space of Santiago, in mountain range, its lands, and its climate and its flora, with the temperament of its people. A palace expressed geometrically in front of the cosmic complexity of the Andes. Next. The submission conceived a set of buildings where a central piece assumed the task of monumental representation. The building's plan is based on a 96 by 96 meter quadrangle about the urban dimension that confront the vast space of American geography. Next, destined to house the offices, the quadrangle, or ring, in the outer definition, encloses a vast inner spaces where 3 extraordinary buildings are set. The caracol, snail shell, a conical helicoid containing the assembly rooms, the diamond-shaped volume which houses a conference room, and the service core, named Núcleo, linked to the quadrangle by a series of pedestrian bridges. I hope you can identify any building inside of the quadrangle. The caracol, the snail shell, and the small rectangular is the diamond-shaped volume, and the huge one is the Núcleo. Both bridges and buildings qualify the inner void in 4 courtyards or patios. Next. The ring is an autonomous single unit, continuous pavilion suspended over ground level, hanging from a structure above. This structure consists of a succession of post-tensioned concrete elements supported on 2 continuous lateral main beams. The latter rest on 4 columns aligned on each side of the quadrangle cantilever at the corners. You can see here is the first floor plan, the main entrance plan. Next. An essential solid volume, the Núcleo, contains 5 indoor levels, 2 of which establish the underground connection, concentrating service, equipment, and facility. But it also constitutes the core of the ensemble. reuniting the 4 bridges you can see there in the plan that connected to the quadrangle and the entrance halls to both assembly rooms on the caracol. On its roof, a lookout terrace encompassed a folder slab, providing an outdoor auditorium at 2 cylindrical shapes, one corresponding to the vents and the other to the main staircase that led to the terrace. Okay, never executed. The diamond was a polyhedron, hence the name, that hung high over one of the courtyards on a folder structure cantilevered from only 4 structural points. Next. Next. There are the sections. Next. These 2 last ones. Okay, ahead. Thank you. The caracol is, however, the most crucial elements of the complex. The form of the caracol is intended to symbolize its functions, a place for discussions leading to the establishment of the future pattern of development for Latin America. A conical helicoid in a truncated cone shaped by a double skin of concrete that shifts to accommodate an external staircase, culminating in a lookout terrace. Inside, it houses 2 overlapping assembly rooms for the commission. The main one has a magnificent speciality generated by its 15 meters high. Next. The completion of the building involved numerous technical challenges. Constructional audacity, structural boldness, and material prowess in the design were closely connected with the work's visual expression and monumental significance. Next. The architect himself acknowledged that the structure represented, and I quote, a major effort in design, analysis, calculation, and execution in construction. Still, it was only during a project like the United Nations one that we could and ought to build an architectural and technical complex with the structural characteristic of this building. This can be seen in an effort to maintain the open plan under the ring, the presence of the columns on the floating corners, and the sculptural definition of the snail. This strong structural definition appealed to the memorability of the image, with the geography treatment of the slopes and courtyards gardens would attenuate it. And here I have these 2 pictures with the building under construction, just to take a look of the complexity of the construction and the calculus also. Next. The relevance of the ECLAC building in the context of architectural production worldwide lies possibility in the distance that separated it from the other expressions of the time, in Duarte's uniqueness for knowing how to situate this work given the conceptual density that conceived it. Duarte was aware of the new dimension in architecture in line with the ideas of new monumentality that had been recognized during his stay at Harvard. As he would state years later, and I quote, 20th century architecture shows, since post-war years, a natural evolution towards increasing incorporation of the expression of geographical and historical values specific to each cultural region. End of quote. The achievements of his building are evident, a kind of modernism that already constructed and surpassed the abstract schemes on previous United Nations buildings. Next. It was time to generate a new approach filled with significance. Duarte assigned them several critical references to understanding the building. The one rested in its metric definition. The quadrangle matched the size of the Manzana Fundacional, the block that characterized Spanish foundation cities in America, in a clear allusion to the urban tradition having to face the colossal dimension of the landscape in the Andes. It also assumed a precise scale, adjusted to that of the colonial city where horizontality prevailed. So did the present of the wall, contracted only with one entrance along the entire lateral sides. Finally, it scaled the inner landscape according to the customary dimension of the courtyards belonging to the Chile traditional houses. That was the way that the traditional houses in the main Hispanic foundation cities in America were done, with 4 courtyards in the block. Next. But simultaneously, the building conveyed a concept of eagerly modern space. Unlike the traditional confinement given by the adobe walls of traditional houses, the free plan allowed by the hanging volume permitted continuity of the space, enclosure, and transparency between the inner courtyards and the outside. You can see this in the sections, mostly in the first and the third section. You can see the open space and the space in a kind of centrifugal action going outside the ring. Next. The choice of forms referred to the pre-Columbian American monumentality with the needed autonomy not to replicate any specific formula. The truncated cone with its elliptical paths could be a remembrance of both pyramid and observatory, but it remained at the same time a novel concept emergent from its function. Its height and presence in the complex highlighted the dominance of the assembly over bureaucracy, reversing the functionalist schemes that Mumford criticized for the United Nations New York headquarters. Next. Several details propose a vocabulary consistent with these more excellent definitions. Next. With their pyramid aspects, the square-based column anticipated a distant relations to those offered by Mies van der Rohe in the Bacardi project while expressing formal autonomy. Next. The main entrance featured a marquee shaped like a cantilever tile supported by 2 beams projected from the facade. Once again, the sculptural shape associable with the traditional forms of Latin American construction in an unexpected situation building with elegance at the main points of the facade. Next. No doubt his experience with Le Corbusier approached the exposed concrete condition that was being discussed in global architecture culture by the time, imposing an aesthetic dimension accompanied by an orthodox integration of work of art. The symbolic narration of humanity history in the bas-relief or the workers' handprints on the walls of the main facade. Traits of symbolic significance strongly distanced of similar architectural approach in Latin America. Next. The project memoir was published in the local magazine AUCA and oriented the first interpretations. A note reported that Duarte had sent images to Le Corbusier with a dedication that read, This project, and I quote, sorry, this project is dedicated to you. Your example has been our guide, which within the greatest freedom has ensured our search. AUCA also presented in the interview, in an interview in which, in the form of questions, a critical evaluation of the project composition, the structure, and ambience was oriented. The interviewee pointed directly to the problem by asking, which was the most suitable composition to express the primary content of the international fraternity involved in the theme? Next. The Argentine magazine Suma highlighted the symbolic value of the building, not only for its institutional condition, but also for its formal characteristic and the plastic resources used. While noting an approximation to Le Corbusier, the emphasis was placed on the reflection on the geography and traditions of Chilean architecture, achieving some, and I quote, something more than more translation. Through a spatial reading, an analysis of the structure, and the use of reinforced concrete, it was noted that the formal features were manifested by architecture as an expression of technology. Next. So you can see this was the picture published in Suma, which is quite different to the other, because you can see there the beam on these four columns and the ring hanging from them. Next. The building was published also in Progressive Architecture with a text based on the author's description, but that ended with a direct critique, and I quote, "The whole complex looks, from this view, a rather novel and impressive concept. One marred here and there, however, by an undigested Chandigarism, such as the breezes shots in the southwest." So the word is quite bizarre, Chandigarisms. That means it seems to be related with Chandigarh. Next. The canonical interpretation gradually identified the building formally and physiognomically with the Assembly Palace of Le Corbusier. So many critics improved the idea of similarity between both buildings. Brown, in 1988, warned that it was improper to understand the work under the sole optic of Le Corbusier's influence. Also, he directly affirmed the analogous relationship, and I quote, "in its general party, materials, and language to the Assembly Palace, adding as confirmation the dedication of the projects that was published in AUCA. The consecration of the canon occupied a preponderant place in the countless publications. The paradigm of influence can be read in numerous publications reiterating the comparison to the Assembly Palace." Next. The argument is reproduced in the catalog of the recent exhibition about Latin American architecture at the MoMA, where it is stated that Duarte had worked with Le Corbusier, I'm quoting, on the new Punjab capital at Chandigarh, a project recalled here in the distinctive conical forms of the Un-CEPAL Assembly Hall, which rises above the roof line of the open rectangular frames of offices, creates a sky-high lighting for an inward-looking meeting room and offers a public observatory of the roof. The recurrence of the canonical narrative is verified without a significant enrichment. Reiteration shows the permanence of the canonical criticism argument as disposition that the structure, the possible thinking about the building. You can see in both plans the difference of the Assembly Palace and the United Nations. This is a picture showed in the book from Cristian Berríos, Emilio Duarte, Elaboración de un espacio urbano. It's not in the same scale, so you can see the Assembly Palace is less, it's a little bit small than the other one, and mostly the inside inner space of the Assembly is it's a hypostyle room where in the CEPAL there's 4 patios. Next. As we have seen, there is not shortgate of critiques that repeat the argument of the influence. The project dedication published in AUCA has been frequently used to affirm the similarity between the ECLAC building and the Corbusian structure. The art project, of course, has an affinity to the Assembly Palace, but we must see the difference. The dedication clearly warned that the example of the master had been taken freely, a part that has been habitually eliminated. Duarte established distance from the master in some interviews, stating that they knew that he was closer to a state of mind than to formal solutions. Unclear in his speech when receiving the National Architectural Award, stating that, and I quote, it was good that I had enough autonomy to receive the influence of that great creator without being irradiated, as happened to some of his younger collaborators. Next. The period he worked with Le Corbusier has always been an argument for establishing formal connections. Duarte came to work briefly at Atelier 35 Rue des Sèvres in 1952, when he was already 35 years old and had developed a remarkable career in Chile. He did not seem a very impressionable young man. Next. Recent serious and documented research indicated that he did so between late April and early July on that year, probably after Le Corbusier arrived from his trip to Chandigarh and when an accident prevented him from continuing his assignments. His participation consists mostly on only one sketch for the Secretariat building made during May, and 141 hours of work according to the fiche horaires, the book where the signs of the collaborators of Le Corbusier during June, dedicated only to the Villa Shodam. Next. It seems essential to remember that for the months and a half or so that Duarte was at the atelier, the project for the Assembly Palace was still in its infancy, in its the very beginning, with no volumes protruding from the roof. You can see in this is an approximation of the other plant we just saw. The Palace of the Assembly is in the center, and it's only with 2 inclinated roof and a huge in the middle, without the conical forms habitually we see in the plans of 56. So the roof was mostly straight and without difference, and it was a huge inner space. Next. Those 2 months working at the atelier with no direct relationship to the Assembly Palace, it fixed the interpretation of the building. The operation of the critics were based on the idea of influence and a physiognomic reading that affirmed the resemblance. A typological analysis would be enough to see the difference. Indeed, the square composition and the prominence of a protruding shape seem apparent. Next. However, the most significant difference resides in the structure of the courtyards versus the enclosed space of the hypostyle hall. The radically different facts undoubtedly lies in one of the aspects that have often gone unnoticed. The free plan of the noble flow caused by hanging the upper floor from the ring supported only by 4 columns per side. Architectural research might dismiss the similarities that can be quickly established. It's a hanging structure. It's not a hypostyle hall, and it's a ring with an inner space and a free plan in the basement. No one who knows architecture would say it is a copy, stated Duarte, further clarifying that Le Corbusier detested copycats. An emphasis on spatial reading would ratify the differences. Next. The building programs grew during the project definition and construction phase when it was destined to the CEPAL-ECLAC, Economic Commission for Latin America and the Caribbean. Since its inauguration and through 3 decades, the function have increased, occupying the diaphanous floor under the ring. Towards the mid-2000s, a revaluation process was initiated to preserve the building, including clearing the successive additions. Next. Faced with the effects of the 2010 earthquake, a survey was carried out on the form of further building intervention. Among others, ECLAC headquarters had suffered several injuries in the office quadrangle and the structure built during the 80s above the nucleo. Next. Docomomo offered the General Secretariat to collaborate with the building's repairs and transformation, and among other suggestions, suggested organizing a seminar to discuss proposals as it had already been implemented on a previous occasion. Next. Next. The seminar was convened to discuss and explore design ideas and identify intervention strategies for the existing building, considering its heritage features. The design finally accepted by the Commission was utterly reversive and less intrusive to the building. It was a project from Pablo Sari, Christian Binker, and Felipe Fritz. Next, you can see the addition at the top of the nucleo. Go ahead. Next. Next. And next. You can see in this whole view the part added at this time. After the restoration, the building reopened in 2014 when the Economic Commission joined the celebration of the Heritage Day, an open day for visiting historical buildings. The institution instructed its staff members as guides with an official narrative that included repeated allusions to Le Corbusier. Guided tours, a novel resource to promote the values of the building's architecture, turned out to be moments of dissemination of the canon, the wrong canon. Next. Including also the funny idea that the windows in the second floor provoke music by the wind. In a bizarre interpretation of the next ideas, Duarte copy the musical, next please, the musical proportions for the Ronchamp Chapel, when actually the windows are completely different. Next. The supposed identification of the original author with the master made it possible to assume the use of Le Corbusier colors palette. Light blue, pink, and yellow from the 20s palette have been used on the interior walls of the core. And of course, it was different than that Duarte palette, which was more strong in a dark green. It seems like a minor operation, but the light intensities are different, losing part of the spatial qualities due to the lighting effects. Likewise, the library renovation was done in white, replacing the tone of the surface woods made of local Surinamese and precious woods from Belize which were donated for these countries to the original building. Next. This approach presupposed the existence of a symbolic capital added to the building because of the relationship between its author and the world-renowned architects. That means between the relationship in between Duarte and Le Corbusier. Next. Once assumes, it seems to become an habitual condition of which it is not longer known how it was acquired, even appearing natural without identifying its origin, becoming an apparently objective condition. The interpretative paradigm has dominated the practical sense of those who work in the institution, both for cultural diffusion and for architectural intervention. The criticism has placed a remarkable building in a troublesome position. However, the revelations that can be offered by a building that assumes an uncomfortable canon are not few, indicating that further studies in the context of the author's ideas can provide exciting conclusions. The critics never addresses the question that Auca highly asked from the beginning, and I quote again, what was the most appropriate composition to express the essential content of an international fraternity involved in a United Nations buildings? Next, Duarte arrived at Harvard in 1942 at the beginning of the debate of the new monumentality, and later became fully aware of the criticism of both the United Nations buildings with the meaningfulness. The building shows at least 5 actions in pursuit of this monumentality. The first is the definition of a plinth, formed by a system of bearing walls made traditionally with local stone, which give strength and correspond to the dimension of the surrounding geography. Next. The second is the clear exhibition of the structural effort, both by the horizontal definition of the main beams and the 4 columns per side that support them, freeing the cantilevered angles of the hanging floor. Next. The third is the diaphanous free plan achieved by hanging the upper floor, which in the manner of a palace proposes a modern sail des pas perdus, an open hall, and induces the spatial conception of open form, reaffirmed by the centripetal sense of orientation of the bridge from the center to the edge. The fourth is the system of reference to the past, both to the colonial Ibero-American courtyard houses and the formal reference of the cone to the monumental dimensions of a pre-Columbian past. Finally, the system of cultural and collective representations, such as the integration of arts, the bas relief of the history of the humanity in the ascending path of the snail. You can see there are some of the bas reliefs. The object of poetic reaction, such as the inverted single over the entrance, and, as I said previously, or the handprints of the personnel who work that one, yes, who work on the construction that populate the wall of the main facade. Next. Next. The building meets most of the points climate for the new monumentality, from the application of new materials and techniques in new structural conceptions, the care in the location, the relationship with geography and nature in the courtyards and gardens, the integration with art, among others, satisfying the collective inspiration of joy, pride, and excitement that it was said in the memoir. Next. An intervention properly made and lacking of presumption can measure itself with a multiple dimension of quality encompassed in works that become modern movement masterpieces, such as the United Nations building in Santiago. It existed in modern architecture and still exists among its built evidence. A collective dimension expresses in the development of a sharp aesthetic. This search for representation overcomes and even exceeds individual creativity. Next. For the same reason, all contemporary intervention to be performed on modern architecture will find as main contender the sheer quality of its original resolution. To overcome it, however intense, should compromise a dose of creativity equal at least to that modern architects such Emilio Duarte put into action in each case. But that means reading the building in its originality. Next. Thus, the main task for active sustainability of a modern monument lies in the assessing its material dimension and decoding its opportunities for design in a contemporary key, keeping at the same time its original significance. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Horacio, for your presentation. I give the floor to the audience if you have a question for Horacio, or maybe we can start a conversation between Maximiano and Horacio that is still with us.
I will be here. I can.
Yeah. Now I can see you. Okay. What are the? I have a question for both. In synthesis, what are the challenges for the future of these modern buildings today in the city, with the in the city, or in the location for in the Maximiano case, the location of the Montemar? What are the challenges for the next future and for the future in 50 years?
You want to go ahead, Maximiano?
Yes, yeah, go ahead.
Max?
Me? Okay.
You want to start? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Well, I would say that as I said, one of the facts that could explain what is happening now to Montemar is that the authorities of Faculty of Ocean Sciences has taken the initiative to assess positively their building and recognize that the option of an extension is not an option. So I think that in a way, I think it's a success of everything that we have done regarding them, accompanying them, going to meetings, explaining them what are the values of the building, is that they have taken the action in their hands they're working in this declaration of for a historical monument, which probably will lead to some plans of intervention and some ways in which they could fulfill this need of what I was talking before of combining the needs of the building, of expanding their teaching space with the architectural historical values of what can be preserved. I think it's not possible, as I said also, it's not possible to go back to the inauguration state. I mean, probably when we see these buildings that are advancing in history, as in the case of the United Nations, for instance, when we did this call for ideas for replacing the meeting room in the roof. I mean, part of this history is it has to take into account the changing needs and the changing views on architecture. The thing is that it has to be well done. It has to be respecting the values of the building. And I would say that the present situation of Montemar, with this awareness of the owners, is something that we could be hopeful about. I mean, I don't know what will happen. There have never been a lot of let's say, financial intervention in the building, so it's in a very bad shape in general. So I think that what is happening today could be a hope, but I couldn't say for sure what will happen. But I think that what is happening now is positive. And they contacted me to review the dossier for the declaration, and I think that it's in a good way. I mean, probably let's hope that this will lead to some happy interventions or happy actions to not to restore the building, because I think it's impossible, but to intervene it in a way in which it will be respectful of the conditions of the building.
Thank you.
I think it's mostly the same that Max was telling, but I think it's a kind of work we can do without having the power and the finance to restore the buildings. We did all at the same time in both buildings. We try to change the significance of the building. One is very significant. The United Nations was pretty clear that it was a very good building, but at the time we started with the campaign to take care of the building, it was completely full, constructed under the ring and the place, because it was a roof. It was a place to build some offices and a lot of stuff. When the people of the infrastructure unit in CEPAL understood the way they can go ahead with the building. They understood the building, but at the same time, it was operating this canonical interpretation that said it was a Corbusian building. So some of the actions they did were related with this paradigm, with this idea. In the case of Montemar, we apply for the Keeping It Modern initiative at the Getty, and one of the evaluators said it was a not very well-known building. It's not a very, very interesting building. It was not a significant building. So we did the change also this idea. Because of the building was not very, what can I say, textualized, or it wasn't in very important narratives of the history of architecture in Chile or in South America as others buildings. So it was quite unknown, and they decided not to finance the study for the conservation plan. So it was also a problem in which it was in some ideas. If you think that our buildings are mostly copies of significant buildings in other places, you don't need to take care of that because the original is in another place. So if you can intervene the building, you can intervene with the idea that the original is an abstract, that it is placed in India or everywhere. So you cannot understand the truly building as it is. And that is the main work that we can do. We can do from our academic actions. Notice that it is a different building that you are thinking it is, and change the paradigm of the interpretation, because in every intervention there is a previous interpretation of the building. It is not only values, you know, it's a whole idea to intervene with a point of view that in every case mark the ideas of the project, mark the ideas of the design, and mark also the constructions with the textures and everything. In the case of CEPAL, the misunderstood of the Duarte the Duarte ideas, decided to take the Le Corbusier ideas. It was there the strong blue and the strong green, but they decided to replace with the Le Corbusier palettes from the 20s. So we have a tiny yellow, we have a pinky something, and a very light blue like a sky. So it's quite different, totally different from the ideas of Duarte, which, as you can see in the building, they are mostly related with the strong colors. And that's changed the whole light inside of the nucleo. And that is one case. So there's some question there.
Thank you, Horacio. Fernando, go ahead.
Hello. I have this question about for both Horacio and Maximiliano about the difference of these buildings, of these two buildings with the masters, or what Chilean or these Chilean examples has to offer to the modern movement. Is the ability of these buildings to read the landscape or incorporate cultural aspects in its design, as the Fisher's Cove or the Colonial Block or the Chilean house, in difference of Le Corbusier buildings that are imposed in the landscape or not related with the surroundings. That's my question.
Thank you, Fernando. Maximiliano, you want to start?
Okay, well, I mean, I centered my analysis in, when I did the research for this building in 2008 on the idea of the relationship with landscape. And I think that one thing that it's very, I mean, to explain this, what you're talking about, of this idea of what can these buildings offer to the history of modern architecture, is that the idea that the landscape is always local. I mean, you can translate ideas, you can transfer visions, all that, but landscape is always local. So the relationship that a building has with its landscape is unique, and it's always local. And I would say that in both cases, this idea of the building taking some relationship with their landscape is something that's it's very unique in both cases. I mean, you cannot reproduce landscape in the way that you would like to do it if you were doing a copy building or an inspired building from some master. And in these two cases, which have been normally described in terms of relationship with the landscape or with the local context, or with its historical context. In the case of CEPAL, with the idea of the house, of the colonial house and the monument and all that. For instance, the CEPAL related to the Valley of Mapocho or to the background of the Andes. In Montemar, with the idea of the relationship with the ocean, with the rocks, with the transparency, and with the horizon, is something that it's rather unique. And I think that I'm not sure if I would say that these buildings offer something to the history of architecture, of modern architecture, but I think that they occupy a place in that history that could be very local and very proper. I mean, regarding this thing of the canon, what Horacio was calling the fake canon of the CEPAL as a copy of Le Corbusier's assembly building in Chandigarh. When I went, the first times I went to Montemar to interview the people, the faculty, I mean, the people who were working there, I met a professor, which happened to be the present dean of the faculty. In that moment, he was a professor, but then he was elected dean and is the current dean. He told me that, yes, it's very interesting, this building, because it was designed by, I don't remember if he said that it was designed by Oscar Niemeyer, or it was designed by a disciple of Oscar Niemeyer. And that for me was a rather shocking affirmation, because it meant that the people who were living, in a way, in the building didn't have any idea of where they were working or with the building that were using. I had to check anyway if Guevara in his trip to Brazil had met Niemeyer, so I could say specifically that there was no relationship. And I contacted the Fundación Oscar Niemeyer, and they told me they confirmed that there was no record of Guevara meeting Niemeyer. So, but in a way, this idea the buildings have some relationship to some bigger brother, some bigger inspiration, is something that, if we look at the buildings and if we look at the architecture itself, of the details, of the relationship with the landscape, we could see that there's no necessary this kind of relationships. It could be some inspiration, some ideas, because no architect works isolated completely on his table. I mean, it's open. Everybody is open to ideas. When we design a door, we are designing the door that has been redesigned thousands of years before. So in a way, inspiration and ideas are very fluid. So it's inherent to architecture, the idea that some things here could relate to this other form over there. But I would say that I would keep with this idea that landscape is always local, and in the relationship of a building with its landscape, there you have like the certainty that is unique and that is absolutely local.
I agree completely, and I can say also that in 1945, when the School of Architecture of the Catholic University changed the whole study curriculum, they decided to put a new studio. It was in charge Mario Pérez de Arce, and he decided to improve the idea of the relationship with the geography. And the first generation in 1946 was actually went to the mountains to take pictures and take sketches from different places. So what can I say? When all the whole architectural culture was in a kind of standby because of the war, mostly the ideas of the new way for the architecture was not on the table. It was really still a kind of abstraction priority, and not the relation with the landscape. The case is that at that time it was a kind of a strong path in the architectural culture of Chile. Came from where? Probably from the landscape. If you see the correspondence in terms of time, the manifesto of the 9 points of monumentality, which said a little bit, only one word about relation with geography. It's from 1941, was right on 1941, but it came publicly in 1944. So it was only 1 or 2 years around. And it is pretty clear that a lot of modern architecture grew up in Chile with the notion of the geography. When we did the selections of 4 or 5 cases for the registers of the modern architecture of the Docomomo journal, we decided to name it the exercise on geography or exercise on landscape. I don't remember actually. And mostly the cases were in a plenty relation with the landscape. So the idea of the relation with the landscape is not a kind of imported idea. It was born and grew up in the architectural culture and the Chilean architectural culture at that time, when the international architectural culture was still related with the abstraction and was not a kind of way that some architects can confront, as the case in the New England area in the United States, or the British Columbia area in Canada at that time. It was very few places in the world, and I think Chile was one of that. Probably also in Argentina with the relation with the Pampa and the Grupo Austral from 39, 43, it was at the same time. So the ideas of this kind of strong relation with geography was plenty informing the architectural culture of that time. So it was very important. It's in a kind also, not only in the way that Maximiano was telling, that the landscape is always there and has only the site-specific idea to architecture, also the idea of the architectural culture to take the ideas of this site-specific landscape to confront or to introduce in the architecture.
Thank you very much for the presentation, for the comments, and for the to be part of this new pre-event. And we will wait you next week with another event. If you want more information about it, you can go into the webpage Docomomo Conference 2024, and please join the session and present the session to the call that it's still open, and it will close on 20 September 2023. Horacio, I don't know if you have any.
Yes,
other...
I know Claudia Costa Cabral, who will be the next lecturer. It's right here, but I know probably without the video. Okay, so see you next time, next Tuesday. For the people from the course, also next time, see you. Hi, Claudia.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Max.
Bye, Humberto. Bye, Horacio.
Bye.
Bye-bye.